My daughter replaced me with her mom's rich lover at her wedding after 17 years, raising her alone, but when I didn't show up, the drunk mother destroyed everything in front of the millionaire in-laws, and now she's begging me to save her. My answer left them speechless. I'm 51 years old, I work as a truck driver, and I need to get this story off my chest, because what happened a few months ago at my daughter's wedding basically finished destroying what was left of our relationship. Although if I'm being honest, I think that relationship was already dead years ago, and I just didn't want to see it. The thing is, I spent 17 years raising my daughter completely alone after my ex left me for some guy with money, and in the end, it turns out all that sacrifice meant nothing to her. But anyway, I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand how we got to this point. I met Nancy when we were both like 23 years old. We worked at the same supermarket, her at the register and me unloading trucks in the warehouse. Neither of us came from families with money, we were those people who worked hard just to make ends meet. We fell in love fast, got married a year later, and even though we didn't have much, we were happy, or at least I thought we were. Nancy stopped working when Amanda was born, our daughter, and I started working as a truck driver because it paid better than the supermarket. I spent 14 hours a day driving, sometimes more, but I didn't mind because I was building a life for my family. You know what I mean? I thought we were in this together. Amanda was everything to me from the moment she was born. She was this incredible little girl, always smiling, and I worked all those long shifts thinking about her, about giving her a better life than the one I had. The first few years were good, honestly. Nancy stayed home with Amanda. I worked. On weekends, we did things together like a normal family. We didn't have luxuries, but we had enough. Or so I thought. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, but I guess I was too busy working to notice them. When Amanda was 7 years old, Nancy decided she wanted to go back to work. She said she felt isolated at home all day, that she needed to do something for herself. And I completely understood. Like I thought it was great that she wanted that. She got a job at an upscale cafe downtown, one of those places where people with money go to drink $5 coffee and eat expensive salads. At first, everything seemed fine. Nancy was happier, more upbeat, but then she started coming home late. Sometimes she smelled like alcohol. She started dressing differently, more dressed up. I worked so much that I basically only saw her at night and on Sundays. And when I asked her if everything was okay, she'd say yes, that she was just tired from work. And then one night she came home completely drunk. Amanda was already asleep. Thank God, because what happened next was horrible. Nancy sat on the couch and just laid it all out for me, just like that, as if she was commenting on the weather. She told me she'd met a customer at the cafe, a guy named Lawrence who was like 43 years old at the time, rich guy with businesses and properties and all that. She told me they'd been seeing each other for 6 months, that he'd shown her what her life could be like if she wasn't trapped with me and our financial limitations. That's how she said it. Our financial limitations. And then she told me she wanted a divorce, that she'd already talked to a lawyer, that this was over. I just sat there, unable to process what I was hearing. I asked her about Amanda. What was going to happen with our daughter? And Nancy said, in this cold voice I'd never heard from her before, that I could keep her, that she wasn't going to fight for custody because Lawrence didn't want kids in his life, and she had to respect that. Can you believe it? This woman was willing to abandon her 7-year-old daughter for some guy she met at a cafe 6 months ago. I tried to reason with her, begged her to think it over, that we could go to therapy, whatever. But she'd already made her decision. She left that same night, took 2 suitcases with her clothes and never came back. I had to explain to Amanda why her mom didn't live with us anymore. That was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Sitting down with my 7-year-old little girl and trying to explain, without completely destroying her, that her mom had chosen to leave. Amanda cried for weeks, asked me every day when Mommy was coming back, if it was her fault, if Mommy didn't love her. And I had to comfort her, while inside I was dying too. While trying to keep it all together because someone had to be the functional adult in this situation. The next 17 years were just Amanda and me. I kept working those long shifts, but now I also had to cook, clean, help with homework, go to school meetings, do everything that 2 parents normally do together. I was constantly exhausted, but I did it because she was my daughter, and I loved her more than anything in the world. Nancy would show up once in a while, maybe once or twice a year, always with expensive gifts bought with Lawrence's money. She'd buy Amanda designer clothes, electronics, things I could never afford on my truck driver salary. And Amanda would get excited about those gifts. Obviously, she was a kid. Nancy never stayed long, always had some excuse for why she had to leave, some trip with Lawrence or social event or whatever. I raised Amanda the best I could with what I had. I took her to her dance classes, to her softball games. I was at every school function, even if I arrived straight from work in my dirty uniform, because I didn't have time to change. I taught her to drive, helped her choose college, paid what I could for her education, although she had to take out student loans because I couldn't cover everything. Amanda studied cosmetology and became a hairstylist, and I was proud of her, even when she chose to work at expensive salons instead of something more accessible, because it was her life and her decision. Things started to change after Amanda turned 18. She started spending more time with Nancy, who by then wasn't officially with Lawrence anymore, but still lived off his money. Basically, she was his kept woman, even though he never married her, and from what I heard later, he constantly cheated on her with other women. Nancy lived in a luxury apartment that Lawrence paid for, drove an expensive car he'd bought her, and took Amanda to fancy restaurants and spas, and all those things I could never give her. And I could see how Amanda was starting to see my life, my modest house, my old truck, my job, as something embarrassing, something that wasn't up to par with what she wanted to be. Amanda started visiting me less. Phone calls became shorter, more spaced out. When she came to the house, you could tell she was uncomfortable, like being in my humble home was a burden to her. I tried not to take it personally, told myself it was normal for children to grow up and pull away, but it hurt. Honestly, it hurt to see how the girl I'd raised alone, who I'd given everything I had, now preferred the company of the mother who had abandoned her, but who had access to money and luxuries. Like 2 years ago, Amanda met Kevin at one of the salons where she worked. Kevin came from a family with a lot of money, like really rich. His family had real estate businesses or something. They got engaged after a year of dating, and Amanda started planning this huge, expensive wedding. I assumed, obviously, that I was going to walk her down the aisle, give her away, do all those traditional father things. It was basically the only thing I'd hoped for after all those years raising her alone, that moment of walking with my daughter at her wedding. Then, like 6 months before the wedding, Amanda came to my house. She hadn't come in months, so I should have known something weird was going on. She sat down with me and told me she'd decided there wasn't going to be that walking down the aisle with the father thing. She said it was a patriarchal tradition, outdated, that it treated women like property being, transferred from one man to another. She used all those modern feminism words. And look, I understand those concepts. I'm not a dinosaur, but something didn't add up. I asked her if she was sure, if this was really what she wanted, and she assured me yes, that Kevin and she had decided to do a more modern and egalitarian ceremony. It hurt. I'm not going to lie, but I said I understood, that I respected her decision, even though inside I was dying a little. I'd imagined that moment for years. It was like the only thing I'd allowed myself to dream about after everything I'd sacrificed. But if she wanted something different, well, it was her wedding, right? What happened next was that, like a month before the wedding, I went to a bar after work, something I almost never do, but that day had been especially hard and I needed a drink. And there was Nancy, drunk as always, talking to the bartender and anyone who would listen about Amanda's wedding, I heard her say, and I swear these were her exact words, that she was so excited that Lawrence was going to walk Amanda down the aisle, that it was going to be so elegant and sophisticated, so perfect to impress Kevin's family. I froze with the glass in my hand. The guy who had destroyed my marriage, who had never been a father to Amanda, who hadn't even married Nancy after all these years. That guy was going to have the honor of walking my daughter down the aisle while I'd been sold a story about feminism and outdated traditions. I left the bar without Nancy seeing me, went straight to my truck and sat there. I don't know how long, just trying to process this. The next day I went to Amanda's house without warning. She was there with Kevin, planning wedding things, and I just asked her straight out, "Amanda, Is Lawrence going to walk you down the aisle? You should have seen her face. She went completely pale. Kevin excused himself and went to another room. Like the coward knew what was coming. Amanda tried to deny it at first, but I insisted. Told her I'd heard Nancy talking about this, that I needed the truth, and then she admitted it to me. She said yes, that Lawrence was going to walk with her, that it had been Nancy's idea but that she'd accepted because, and I quote exactly, Kevin's family comes from old money and tradition. They need to see that I have sophisticated connections. And you're a middle-class truck driver, Dad. You don't fit in that world. You wouldn't know how to behave in that environment. She called me a middle-class piece of junk. Her father, the guy who had raised her alone for 17 years, who had sacrificed everything for her, who had missed hours of sleep and moments of his life to make sure she had what she needed. And to her, I was a piece of junk who wasn't sophisticated enough for her elegant wedding. I asked her why she'd lied to me about the patriarchal tradition, and she said, in that cold voice that reminded me horribly of Nancy, that she thought it would be easier if I believed it was a philosophical decision instead of a personal one. Easier for her, I guess, not for me. I asked her if she'd ever cared about everything I did for her. All the years I spent being mother and father at the same time while Nancy was enjoying her luxury life. And Amanda told me yes, that she appreciated all that, but that now she was building her own life and needed to do what was best for her future, and Lawrence and Nancy had the connections and status she needed. I stood up and told her I wasn't going to her wedding, that if I wasn't good enough to walk her down the aisle, then I wasn't good enough to be there at all. Amanda started crying, saying I was being dramatic, that I could come as a guest, that she still wanted me there. But I told her no, that I had to draw this line because if I didn't do it now, I never would. 22 years of being her father, 17 of those completely alone, and this was what I was worth to her. A seat in the audience, while another man took the credit. I left her house and blocked her on everything. Phone, social media, email, everything. I needed that space, because I knew that if I gave her the chance, she was going to try to manipulate me into changing my mind. She was going to use all the emotional tactics she knew. And I'd already made my decision. For the first time in my life, I was going to put my own feelings first. I was going to stand up for my own worth. On the wedding day, I stayed home. I'm not going to lie, it was one of the hardest days of my life. I kept thinking about how it should have been, how I'd imagined that day for years. But I also knew I'd done the right thing by not going, by not validating with my presence the way I'd been treated. What happened at the wedding? I found out later from a friend who works at the venue where the event was held, and apparently, it was a total disaster. Nancy arrived completely drunk. Like she couldn't even walk straight. And not only that, she started flirting super inappropriately with Kevin's father, touching him, making suggestive comments to him, all in front of his wife and the other guests. People were uncomfortable, looking at each other not knowing what to do. And then, Lawrence and Nancy had an explosive fight in the middle of the reception. Nancy started yelling at him that they'd been together for 17 years and he'd never married her, that he constantly cheated on her, that she knew about all his other women. Lawrence yelled back at her that she was a pathetic drunk who had abandoned her own daughter for money, that the only thing she'd contributed to his life was problems. All this happened in front of all the guests, including Kevin's rich and traditional family that Amanda supposedly wanted so badly to impress. Kevin's parents and several other guests left indignantly before the reception ended. Apparently, Kevin's mother told Amanda that her family was an embarrassment and that they were going to have to seriously reconsider whether Kevin should go through with this marriage. The wedding, this elaborate and expensive thing that was supposed to establish Amanda in that world of money and status, became the town gossip, and not in a good way. Like 2 days after the wedding, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and it was Amanda, crying hysterically, calling from a friend's phone because I had her blocked. She was begging me to help her, to talk to Kevin's parents, to use my influence to fix things. And I laughed. Honestly, I couldn't help it. I asked her what influence she thought I had. If according to her I was a middle-class piece of junk who didn't know how to behave in sophisticated environments. I asked her why she didn't ask Lawrence for help, the sophisticated man she'd chosen to walk her down the aisle. Amanda started saying she'd made a mistake, that she regretted saying those things to me, that she'd been under a lot of pressure from Nancy and Kevin. But she never said she regretted her actions, you know what I mean? She only regretted that her actions had consequences. I told her she'd chosen her family. She'd chosen Nancy and Lawrence over me, and now she had to live with that choice. That I'd spent 17 years rescuing her, saving her, being her safety net, and that was over. I hung up and blocked that number too. Like a week later, I got an email from Amanda, a long message where she kind of apologized, but also blamed me for not showing up to save her when she needed me most, for not being the father who put his daughter first no matter what. She said that yes, maybe she'd made mistakes, but that I was making the biggest mistake by abandoning her in her most difficult moment. I didn't respond to that email. I have nothing more to say to her. The thing is, I spent my entire adult life putting her first. Every decision I made for 24 years was thinking about Amanda, about giving her the best life possible with the resources I had. I missed dates, friendships, opportunities, because I was always working or taking care of her or worrying about her, and in the end, none of that mattered to her. The only thing that mattered was money and status and looking good in front of people she probably doesn't even really like. I found out Amanda and Kevin are still married, but that the relationship with his parents is completely destroyed. Nancy and Lawrence are still in their dysfunctional situation, and Amanda apparently is still trying to fix her reputation in those social circles. I decided that after a lifetime of sacrifice, it was time to do something for myself. I joined a biker club, something I always wanted to do but never had time for. I made real friends for the first time in years, people who don't judge me for my job or my modest house. We go out on weekends, go to concerts, take motorcycle trips. It's simple, but it makes me happy in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. My friends from the club convinced me to create a profile on a dating app. They helped me with photos and everything. I've been talking to a woman named Casey. She's 47 years old, also divorced, works as a nurse. We're meeting next week for coffee. I don't know if it's going to work out, but for the first time in decades, I'm doing something just for me. Not because it's my responsibility or my duty, but because I want to do it. Sometimes I think about Amanda, about how she is, about whether she'll ever really understand what she did. But it's not my responsibility to teach her that anymore. She's an adult who made her decisions, and I'm an adult who finally made his too. I don't know if we'll ever reconcile. Honestly, I don't know if I want that at this point. What I do know is that I'm worth more than being someone's backup plan, even if that someone is my daughter.